So what I'm going to talk about is the topic is new payments and new money with a question mark, because as much I'm sure that we are facing a revolution in payment, it's still an open question whether it will see the apparition of truly new monies in the sense that we generally mean it. And the new payments I'm going to talk about are what we call e-cash. These are those this money that you have on your mobile phone and that you can send around all over the world just by clicking or by using a QR code. And they have different forms, they have different names. They can be called e-money, they can be called stablecoin. Stablecoin is the fashionable denomination today, but they're all sort of being the same kind of animal, and a very different animal from cryptocurrencies, although they use some of the same technology. So cryptocurrency, I understand, will be dealt with by Adam later. So I will concentrate on those on those e-cash application. And I would like to start with this very, very interesting quote by Milton Friedman. Milton was a genius, and he saw in 1999 what was coming 25 years later. And he said, we saw that we will have a reliable e-cash, a method whereby on the internet, you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B and B knowing A. Exactly the same as I hand you a $20 bill in a peer-to-peer transaction, which can stay anonymous. So this is exactly what's going on now. We have the technology and the way to organize transaction on the internet, which are very, very similar to a physical transaction of cash. We have a new form of money. This is what I was aiming at, which are digital tokens. What is a digital token? It's basically an electronic file with my name on it and a value attached to it. So we have to add the proper system to do that. And when my name is on it and the value attached to it, and with the progress of cryptography, I'm the only one who can access that file. I can change the name on the file, and the file is yours. And by doing that, I have made a payment. And I can do a payment without having at all a recourse to a bank. So these tokens are very similar to physical tokens, like banknotes. They are peer-to-peer, they are possibly anonymous. The only difference is that, of course, since we are in the digital world, you need a ledger. You don't need a ledger to register banknotes, but you need a ledger to register those tokens. And there's a big discussion whether those ledgers should be centralized or decentralized, which is not my point today, but you must be aware that there is this discussion. So what are those tokens? They are objects and they are not claims. So we are moving back. We have been 200 years with a system of payments which was bank-based. And the money we were using, which was the deposit in the bank, were actually claims on the banks. And we were transferring to ourselves to make payments, claims on the banks. And what is coming is that we can transfer ourselves digital objects without possibly using a bank. And I think this is one of the very important facts that we must realize. We may have a life without the bank in the future. It's not a given, but it's a possibility. And those tokens are exchanged on networks, and the networks are very large. I'll say a few words on it. And that offers a great flexibility. They can be backed by some asset. They can be unbacked, like Bitcoin is. Bitcoin is backed by nothing. Or they can be backed like Libra and stable coins and have a different sort of relationship to their intrinsic value. What I want to show you now, so you could say, what's new? We all have we have wallets on our mobile. This is what most of you have. You have a wallet, which is an application, and that application allows you to use your bank account at distance, but it's still very much a bank-based system. You just use the app to communicate with your bank or your bank account. The app gives you access to your bank account, and you use it. What is coming, and what is already extremely spread in both Africa and China, and maybe coming the rest of the world, is something very different. This is this, right? So you have an issuer which issues token. The issuer has a backing for its token. This is the principle of e-money and stablecoin. That backing can be in form of securities. It can be a deposit at the central bank, or it can be a deposit at the bank account. And on the basis of that backing, the issuer issues tokens to the customers. So this is a very simple sort of graph, but it represents the common principle and the common architecture to what is called stablecoins, what is called e-money. All the big two China payment system, I will come back to them in a minute, are working on that principle. Libra would be working on that principle when it's created, the money by Facebook, and M-Pesa in Kenya is exactly working on that principle. So what is important here is that you have a network of customers who can pay, or users who can pay to one another without ever using that, because the issuer manages the payment between them. So the whole question is, how many people do you have there at the bottom of that system? Well, in China, you have 1 billion for WeChat, 900 million for unfinancial. So you basically have a customer base. They overlap, of course, but you have a customer base of basically 1.5 billion people using that system and able to make payments to one another without, again, moving their bank account, because their bank account is held by the issuer of token. That's an extraordinary evolution. It occurred over the last 5 years, and it's an enormous change. And it certainly prejudges what's going to happen to the rest of the world, both in advanced and in emerging economy. In Kenya, M-Pesa has 70 million people using it. Most of them, or some of them, unbanked, and it works very well. I have a friend who's managing an SME in Kenya, and she uses M-Pesa to manage her company. She has a bank account, but most of her employees do not. And so you can have a life with that. And of course, Libra, if and when Libra is created, Libra will be exactly the same. And Libra will be created on the Facebook network, and Facebook has 2.7 billion users. So potentially those networks are extremely important. And the ability, again, to make payments between several hundred millions of people without transiting by a bank is an extremely enormous change in our landscape. So you can see how it took off very, very quickly in China. In less than 6-7 years, the mobile payments transactions have grown exponentially. And what is very interesting now is to explore what may happen to the banking sector as a result. And I will present two sort of schematic description of where we may be moving to. What we have now, to be very schematic, is what I would call a bank-centric system. So you have the bank. The bank does the lending. It does the customer relationship. We have all of us as user, we have a deposit in a bank account, and the bank sits at the center of the financial intermediation system. It has, of course, a payment function, but that payment function is very often outsourced to other intermediaries. And it's basically seen as a logistic function. It's not, the bank does not define itself by its payment function. It defines itself by its credit function and by its knowledge of the customer, right? And it has also other services which can be offered as an addition. But the important thing is that the deposit function and the credit function sit as the center of the financial intermediation. What we may have tomorrow, and we already have in a certain extent in China, you have the payment platform. The payment platform is, of course, very much articulated either with a social network, which is the case of WeChat, or an e-commerce network, which is the case of Alipay. And the payment platform has the relationship with the customer, the privileged relationship with the customer. And so the payment function, which was in the previous graph seen as a kind of logistical annex to the credit and deposit taking, is now at the center of the financial intermediation. Of course, the payment gives you access to data. So the data allows you to score, and the scoring allows you to give credit. And that's how it works. So by having the relationship with the e-commerce, the social, the customers, the data and the scoring, you have, of course, a bank. You need always a bank to have an account and to ultimately settle your transaction. But the bank is becoming, sort of to speak and to exaggerate a little bit, the bank is becoming the logistical function, and the central function is the payment. So we are moving, I think, due to the technology, to a payment-centric organization of the financial system and financial intermediation. And of course, those payment platforms, it is very important, have an asset management function which is attached to them. And this is exactly what's happening. As you may know, Ant Financial in China has grown in 5 years, the biggest money market fund in the world, which is around $600 billion worth, again, in 5 years. So obviously, this is an exaggeration, this is an oversimplification, but it's a useful visualization of where we may be going to. I said we may have a life without a bank. Shall we have a life without a bank? And I think this is a very interesting question. If I were a banker, that would keep me awake at night. What will be the banking business? How it will be affected by this kind of huge technological innovation? Well, the first thing I think will determine is the competition between the mobile payment and the credit card. So, as you know, the credit card issuers are preparing themselves very actively for that competition. They have endowed their credit card with near field contact capabilities. So the mobile doesn't have a comparative advantage on that. I think both could be made very easily to make retail payments if the merchant has the proper terminal. The mobile allows for peer-to-peer payment with no terminal. That's a big advantage. I always give the example when we were not locked down. If I invite a friend for lunch, he or she can pay for the lunch with he or her credit card. But if you want to split the bill, we cannot use our credit card. So we have either to give a check or cash or use our mobile. And splitting the bill with the mobile by just showing your QR code is extremely easy. So that's the big advantage of the mobile, not to be attached not necessarily attached to a bank account, and allow for immediate peer-to-peer payment on the basis of that network that I described. And finally, again, the general thing is that the mobile allows, but it does not impose to dispense of a bank account. You cannot have a credit card or a debit card without a bank account. You can have mobile money on your mobile without a bank account, and that's what millions of people in Africa have. And as you can see here, the big issue is that the fraction of the population which has access to bank is much smaller than the population which has access to a mobile. And so the prospect for unbanked people to get access to modern payment system is enormously enhanced by the current technology. And the blue dots here are credit card, and you can see that as soon as you get below a certain threshold of income per capita, the credit and debit cards are very, very slightly, very lightly used. So this is clearly the question. And obviously, these mobile technology are a huge element of financial inclusion. That's how Libra, that's one of the main selling arguments that Libra has pushed to try and getting accepted by the regulators, is that it works towards financial inclusion. There are other drivers in that competition between the banks and the mobiles and the big tech, the social habits. So those of you who are kids around 10, 12 years old, you have to wonder whether those kids who have spent all their lives on their mobile, whether they will bother opening a bank account if they don't have to when they get to 18. I don't have the answer to that question, but I think I would ask myself that question again, because I think it's maybe a social evolution. The technology is, of course, very important. We all have and will have new apps on our smartphone, which allows directly to manage our financial portfolio. So we don't even have to have cash in a way. You just have access to an electronic access to your money market fund, and you transfer instantly money from your wallet to your money market fund through an app which does that almost instantly. So what will become money in the future? I don't want to make a theoretical presentation here, but what will become money in the future in such an environment, and how you can conduct monetary policy if you're a central bank in such an environment, is a very, very interesting question. And of course, the last driver is the regulators. The way they will treat those new stablecoin or e-money issuer as compared to bank will, of course, shape the competition. You asked me about Europe. I think Europe may be lagging a little bit behind in the kind of thinking about those issues. They may think they are protected from the competition from China or from the competition from Libra. I'm not so sure, and I think one of the things I would recommend for the European regulator is to start thinking very, very hard on how they're going to deal with this kind of competition. The big advantage, of course, and it has been shown in many circumstances, of a payment through a network exchanging tokens over a banking system is the cross-border payment. We all know that making a cross-border payment through the bankings involves at least 3 or 4 counterparty relationship, very difficult to make, very costly, very difficult to verify, at least for retail amounts. And that's a huge friction in the global payment system. And that is the friction that even cryptocurrency, whom I think are very important, imperfect objects, are becoming extremely competitive. If I have to transfer, let's say I'm a Brazilian household. I have a son or a daughter making studies in South Korea. He or she needs $2,000 in a matter of hours because he or she has to make some rent payment or whatever. Well, if you do that for the banking system, you have 2 foreign exchange, you have counterparty relationship. If you do that through a token-based system like Libra in the future or Bitcoin now, you can get the money there in a matter of 2 hours. So it's a big advantage in terms of cross-border. And of course, we all know that the correspondent banking system mechanism is heavily impeded by a lot of compliance mechanism, and it's collapsing actually. And this is a big concern for medium-sized banks in emerging economies. Finally, if I look at a little bit at the political and geopolitical aspect, getting away from the competition with banks, a token allows you to do a lot of things. It allows you to create a totally new currency, pure fiat, backed by nothing, which is Bitcoin. It allows you to create synthetic basket currencies, which was the first version of Libra. It allows you to create new international standards. In one of his latest speech as governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney mentioned the creation of a new international synthetic currency, which could compete with the dollar. So it allows you to do a lot of things. And the only sort of barrier is to get acceptance by the people. And if you having a network of several hundred million or 7 billion people, getting acceptance may be very easy. So when Libra launched their first version a year ago, it was actually a new currency in a full meaning of the terms because it was a new unit of account. The Libra was not a dollar, it was not a euro, it was not. It was something new, a new international unit of account. And without getting deep into the monetary theory, a new unit of account is challenging the monetary sovereignty of small and big countries alike. And that was part of the sort of very strong reaction that Libra triggered when it was introduced. And I think they've internalized that. And in the second version, they come up with what they call a Libra dollar, a Libra euro, a Libra Singapore dollar, which are basically stable coins according to the scheme that I showed you, but which are denominated in existing currencies. And I think this is going to prosper much more easily than the previous ones. Because it brings efficiency gains and it brings a lot of advantages. So it's going to be more difficult to the regulators to oppose it. And Libra has appointed a new chief executive with one of the best reputation in compliance world. So they're protecting themselves against the accusation that they will help illicit transaction and money laundering. So if I do a little bit of sort of geopolitical anticipation, if we have Libra denominated in dollar, in euros, if we have the Chinese giants starting to be exporting not only their technology, but also their denomination outside the frontier of China, their technology is all over the Southeast Asia already, but also their denomination, then you see emerging a sort of big new form of currency competition where international currency will be available on large networks in the forms of digital tokens. And that, I think, leaves a lot of questions for big emerging economies who have a great interest and attachment to preserving their quote-unquote monetary sovereignty. And that's why it's no coincidence that that big emerging economies are the most dynamic in studying the issuance by their own central bank of this kind of digital token. Because if the people want it, if the people want to live in the world of mobile money, then the reasoning goes, we better give it to them. Otherwise, they will use the dollar and the renminbi because they will be more convenient. So in my view, it's pretty rational and pretty natural that the big economies are the ones who now are the most dynamic in creating their own currency. The movement, maybe, and that will be my only allusion to what's going on now, but the movement may be strongly accelerated by the COVID, because the COVID, rightly or not, has created a distrust of cash. Cash is suspected to be carrying the virus, although the central banks have clearly denied it was the case. But if cash is suspected of carrying the virus, the general tendency of people not to use cash in their own transaction may be accelerated. And that would be, of course, a huge promotion for the e-cash. Echoing to what Professor Dr. Mulford said an hour ago, that may lead to some kind of segmentation of the world monetary and financial markets. If you have different form of money, different tokens, denominated in different currency, moving all around, but not interoperable, then you can have a segmentation of the world in monetary terms, which will not look exactly as it is now. And one criteria which might be important and which I did not mention is the question of privacy. And whether you trust or not the issuer of this e-money to respect your privacy may be a determining factor in the use of those future digital monies. And clearly, not all the countries and not all the big issuers will have the same approach to privacy, and that might segment the world according to new frontier, terms that we, with some co-authors, we use in calling digital currency areas. Thank you very much, Nana, for the opportunity to make that presentation. And of course, I stand ready to answer questions, including on Europe, of course.